So good afternoon, I am Lynne, for those of you who have not yet met me, and I'm here to tell you my story of how changing my diet improved my view. And on my recent journey, I've learned that autoimmune disease has a genetic component, and I have a strong family history. Not that way. A strong family history of thyroid problems. Both my maternal and paternal grandmothers were hypothyroid, one also with bilateral pronounced thyroid eye disease and severe rheumatoid arthritis. I also understand that stress can play a role, and I have certainly had my fair share of that. And finally, the environment is involved, and my personal research has investigated an important aspect of this, which is diet. So today I'm going to talk you through my diet and medical history, my new diagnosis and treatment, FODMAP discoveries, future diets and probiotics, my health today, and my conclusions. I'm not a microbiologist and I'm not selling anything, but I was a microbiome disaster waiting to happen. I hope that what I've learnt through hindsight may help fellow patients see that there is always hope for improvement, and for medics to see us patients as whole interconnected beings, where our gut, which houses 70% of our immune system, has a huge effect on our overall well-being. I can trace a series of odd events where no pattern was picked up by medics or myself. Food and its effects have had a constant thread in my life. I have a full timeline later to show you links between when I moved, stressful events, hormonal changes. But this is a selection of some of the things I have tried to keep the symptoms of my gut in check over many years. In 2006, I was living in the Netherlands, sleeping upright in a chair. I could barely climb the stairs, and I was needing to sleep during the day. I was thoroughly tested and was diagnosed with asthma and oral allergy syndrome and house dust mite allergy. I tested negative to wheat and dairy. I was given all the relevant medications, dust mite sheets, and put on an elimination diet, which concluded that I should avoid histamine-creating foods and pollen-related foods. And I was told I could eat the fruit and vegetables when they were cooked. I felt so good on the paleo-type elimination diet that I kept many of the brands, the sauces and the stock cubes and the ways of eating on top of the things I was to specifically avoid. My asthma was controlled and my gut was better, but not right. But my Dutch improved. The quandary at this point was that so much effort, time and money had been put into me that I couldn't face any more tests, and concluded that they must have found what was the known cause, if there was one. So I must just be really odd and allergic and a bit of a weak specimen. I thought I'd just work it out on my own, or have to learn to accept that this was life for me. I suspected sugar to be what caused me to crash every now and then, so I reduced sugar, which naturally reduces wheat and gluten, and Chinese food to be what caused the bloatedness, so I blamed soy and MSG and avoided them and Chinese food. How easy it is to mistake the true culprit. My gut was better, even better, but still not right. And Professor Ludgate, Marion Ludgate, who I worked with this to prepare, she's from the Indigo team, and it's one of her colleagues who actually stated that thyroid patients are the patient group most likely to seek alternative therapies, which illustrates that there is more research and training for medics needed. Within 3 months of moving back to the UK, all my previous symptoms began to get worse than usual. And within 2 years, I lay for most of the time like a grey slug on the sofa, undergoing another barrage of tests. I really didn't think I could come back from this. I felt so ill and immobilised. I kept crying, I felt nauseous, I lost 10 kilos, every muscle ached, even my eyeballs. The only changes to my gut was a full sensation from my belly button to under my ribs, and feeling raw inside. I did note that even with iron tablets I wasn't constipated, and I wondered when I'd last had a solid stool. but I wouldn't have said I had diarrhoea. So in 2012, over an 8-week period, I was diagnosed with anemia, a recurring theme in my life, but this time I wasn't just sent away with iron tablets. Celiac disease, a biopsy with no villi, hyperthyroid, my TRAB was 8.9, a small goiter and a tremor. And within a year later, thyroid eye disease in my right eye, and I was in full menopause. Happy 50th birthday. So celiac disease. Being free from all gluten was liberating. No gluten is no wheat, rye, barley or oats. And for oats, you can try to introduce gluten-free oats after 6 months. And this means none in the ingredients or even in the manufacturing process. But while eating in one's own home may be safe, outside is a bit of a minefield. You become an expert at label reading as companies change their ingredients or their manufacturing methods. Even salad contains gluten. Most have pasta or couscous in. So this one in the middle is the only one I can eat in a well-known supermarket chain, and then it has FODMAPs in it, which I will mention later. Or huge calories for a tiny amount of food. So this little honey bun mini is about this big, and he's got 531 calories in it. So the gluten effect. Now what happens when someone with celiac inadvertently eats gluten is that the immune system attacks the villi in the small intestine, causing a huge bloated stomach, extreme fatigue needing to sleep, and then 2 to 3 days of feeling exhausted, emotionally labile and brain fog. I function, but with no motivation. I need to poo more than once a day, sometimes urgently, or being constipated and eggy farts. I had to accept that I had experienced this on and off in the Netherlands for many years, sometimes more extreme than others. This now kept happening to me until I realised that I couldn't have eaten it, as I was being so restrictive on what and where I ate. I was overwhelmed with not being able to control this, and with the amount of conflicting advice on the internet for causes. I was fed up with losing several days to useless exhaustion, now that I knew what it was like to finally live with constant good energy. So I contacted the dietitian at the RVI Newcastle, who you're allowed to see because you have celiac disease, who put me on the FODMAP diet. So the FODMAP diet is to identify the culprits, and it's an 8-week elimination diet, and then it's a reintroduction, and it's devised by the dietitians at the King's College Hospital. So the inner ring in the green are the good guys, and the outer ring are the culprits. I'm afraid it's a bit blurry when it's blown up that big. And which ones or combinations of will be unique to each person and may be problematic only by the amount or the combination you eat. Some of the FODMAPs don't get absorbed into the small intestine, and they are then fermented by billions of bacteria in the large intestine, producing wind and bloating. I coincidentally started this diet about the same time that my thyroid eye disease was developing, which was about a year after being diagnosed with hypothyroidism and celiac. And I was actually too ill to have added any other changes on my initial diagnosis, because believe me, trying to deal with celiac disease when you're hypothyroid is quite a challenge. I bloated with many foods, especially fruit, and it identified sorbitol, which I'd never heard of before. So sorbitol is a sugar alcohol which the human body metabolizes slowly. It's in many tablets, medication, vitamins, and as E492 in many processed foods, even common gluten-free ones. And it occurs naturally in some fruits. It was in the prescribed selenium tablets for my TED and calcium tablets for my celiac. And it mimics gluten in some gut dysbiosis, causing the grey slug effect. I was eating quite a lot of Mrs. Crimbles at that time, because everywhere you went, that was all that was on offer. And they are not only naturally high in sorbitol, because coconut's very high, but they have lots of added sorbitol and glucose fructose. So they were a complete walking disaster for me, or sitting disaster. So it was really useful to learn how long it can take a gut to pass a particular meal, 3 days. And the effects of a bad one can be noted 7 days later. I now know that only gluten and sorbitol have a particular effect on me, and other FODMAPs just cause general grumbling. Understanding the Bristol stool chart years ago would have also been helpful. I was only ever asked if I had diarrhoea, to which I would say no. But swinging between 1 and 6 is also not good, nor is urgency, eggy farts or cramps. Multiple diagnosis means endless hours at various hospital appointments which dominate life, and with the possibility of further autoimmune conditions developing, I wanted to break that cycle if possible. I began to read about my new diagnosis and understood that Yersinia enterocolitica was a possible cause of Graves, and that gut imbalance was also a factor in celiac. Bonnie Bassler's TED talk, How Bacteria Talk, inspired me to starve them so that they couldn't gang up and attack me. I recognised that I had been overwhelmed by bacteria. As my wise, then 17-year-old daughter had said, "You have a new gut. You can't expect it to behave like a 50-year-old's. Babies have to be weaned." But what would help? Our Western diet, however healthy, doesn't culturally contain natural fermented foods, as in many parts of the world, apart from yoghurt. But my body was struggling to process dairy, even though I wasn't allergic to it. And Yakult also contains glucose fructose, which again I couldn't tolerate. I came across water kefir and started brewing it to drink. They provide probiotics to help feed healthy gut bacteria. Kefir grains or tibicos are a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeasts held in a polysaccharide biofilm matrix created by the bacteria. They are found around the world, with no two cultures being exactly the same. It's what our ancestors have used for years before commercial fizzy drinks. Handily, they eat the sugar water that they live in, and they give us probiotics. It's fun to brew, as there are so many alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks which I now cannot have. I also learned a lot about bacteria from them, and I've brought some of them with me, as I mentioned, to those of you who are adventurous enough to try them. So to summarise, this is an overview of my timeline with me and my hormones in the pinky purple. And I can see a few cycles here when I was asked to put it in relevant date and event order. How changes in my hormones combined with intense, sometimes multiple prolonged stress, or moving areas and countries with my body adjusting to new biomes and foods, all created pressure on my autoimmune genes. Was it even the sorbitol in the folic acid tablets and iron tablets which played a part, or the disruption to my biome by antibiotics? The symptoms which I found had stopped after going gluten-free, I believe would have stopped in 2006 had I been fully aware of gluten then and consciously stopped it, or maybe way further back. So is this a diet for life, for autoimmune, to prevent disease? So I decided to take my gut on holiday while my thyroid was also on holiday under its medication. So this is my back to basic diet which I was on while my gut slowly improved. If I couldn't read its nutrient components, I didn't eat it. It's not rocket science or faddy, it's how we've eaten for generations around the world before industrialisation. Basically, it's to avoid and reduce refined carbohydrates and processed foods. Some cultures don't eat any dairy or very little, and in my experience reducing my lactose at home means I can tolerate it socially without suffering later or being deemed a fussy eater. There's culprit FODMAPs. Maybe this is just a modern problem of too much or too many. I also found that I needed to cut out high fructose fruit, pulses and coconut flour, as well as the sorbitol and gluten. But our gut health is unique to each person. You do need the support of a dietitian to do this diet. So to add an increase into it, I've learned a lot of great recipes from other cultures by their naturally very low gluten diet. And I do feel a very different person, physically, my energy, emotionally, and my mental clarity these days. But my gut still grumbles, actually for several months, if I inadvertently eat it. And I also know that my gut is still not completely perfect compared to other people's, because apparently my husband's and other people's never grumbles like mine does. I do take my probiotics every day, and the experts in Cardiff, when I was at the microbiome conference, they said that I do have to take it every single day. And I have learnt from sad experience when I fail to do that, that it does make an enormous difference. So I'm learning slowly. So these are some of the resources I have found useful by other people who've gone back to basics and they've learnt fermenting, or the best way to make pulses digestible. The autoimmune paleo group, I only came across while I was writing this talk, so we're now a year ago. But the foods that they eat are almost identical to how I was eating when I was on the FODMAP diet, except they include some fruits and vegetables which don't accord with FODMAP or Allergy UK's oral allergy syndrome list, and they don't eat rice, corn or potatoes. So the internet is a great resource, but it can also be overwhelming. But use them, pick your way through their recipes, know what your body can eat, and then use their techniques and their inspiration. So my health today, well, this was 3.5 years later. I'll update it for you now because it's now 4.5. My main aim had been to control my ghastly gut and then to see if that would help my exhausted thyroid calm down. My celiac disease, it's under control, and I have great constant energy and no symptoms as long as I tightly manage it. I am more socially acceptable and I can now tolerate all foods except gluten and sorbitol. Sadly, my last celiac test showed I'd gone up from 5 to 48, and so as to whether to test, it's the new, more sensitive diagnostic test that's been developed. I was on 6 months of eating not even any gluten-free foods when I was out. It wasn't that. I then went off gluten-free oats for 4 months to see if it was the avenin in the oats. It wasn't that. So I'm now waiting to see whether I can go on the old assay to see whether that's just me, so that I would have been still normally gluten-free, my celiac levels were down, but I'm waiting to find out about that. So my TRAB was 8.9 on diagnosis. Last year it was 3.3 and it's now 2.6 and it's still falling, and I've had no radioactive iodine to date. And my thyroid eye disease was only in my right eye and it's barely visible. I've been able to come off all my asthma medication except a nasal spray. And while I realise that thyroid and eye diseases have a natural history, which means that they eventually get better with time, I understand that the person seldom ever returns to the same state as they were before they had the problem, whereas I have. And there have been many other and added unexpected benefits. Muscle recovery, I have the energy now to cycle 100 to 100 kilometres a week when it's not raining. I have no yeast and sinus infections, and I have a much improved mental clarity and well-being. So am I what I eat, and has food changed my view? I now believe that we are what our bodies can digest and extract nutrients from. I still take folic acid, as even on a healthy gluten-free diet I have been anemic, and it helps my immune cells while I'm still on carbimazole. I know to avoid sorbitol. If I'd carried on eating it, I would probably have been diagnosed with depression. I keep my own medical diary of symptoms and doctor visits, and I encourage everyone to connect all the many tests that people undergo and to look for a pattern. I accept that each of us has a unique microbiome which requires a personalised eating plan to nurture it, and that we need courage and discipline to take charge of our gut issues now, because it's our gut which houses 70% of our immune system, and it has a huge effect on our overall well-being. And that finally, that women's hormonal changes need extra vigilance when combined with food and stress. So, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. I was asked when I last did it to put my usual kind of eating habits, so I have a list of that to have a look at. But Marion Ludgate has asked, and Janice Hickey, more research needs to be done about this. I'm just a one-off person. And Indigo, who I'm a lay patient member of, they are collecting information about diet and lifestyle from people with thyroid eye disease. So if you'd like to find out more, or if you want to share your experiences, if you'd email this email address here, and they've actually set up a Facebook blog where an edited version of this, my talk, is on, and we're going to try and start a dialogue with people and look at possible diets and ways of helping everybody. So if anybody's interested, I would encourage you to join that. But I would also encourage you not to make any massive dietary changes until you've signed up, because as Petros is saying, we want things to be scientifically done, and the only way that that's going to happen is if we're not randomly going off and doing our own little thing. So thank you very much.